A white female officer racially profiled and arrested a black woman, unaware that she was a city senator. What happens when prejudice clouds judgment and those entrusted with power cross the line? This explosive story uncovers a shocking moment of injustice that spiraled into a fight for accountability and reform. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment where someone was judged unfairly, leading to consequences no one could have predicted? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more inspiring stories of justice and change. The streets of Ravenwood lay still, the hum of nocturnal life muffled by the silence of the late hour. Under the dim glow of streetlights, Senator Diana Carter guided her black sedan through the empty roads. Her thoughts were fixed on the evening's community meeting, a discussion fraught with tension over police reforms and accountability. It had been a long day, but Diana's commitment to justice burned steady. As she turned onto a winding stretch of road surrounded by towering oaks, she felt it, a subtle prickle at the back of her neck. In her rearview mirror, headlights flickered into view. At first, she dismissed it as another car heading home late. But as she made turn after turn, the vehicle stayed with her, maintaining an unsettling distance. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, her pulse quickening. The road was desolate, no other vehicles in sight. The persistent presence of the car felt less like coincidence and more like intent. With a measured breath, Diana resolved to remain calm. She wasn't one to yield easily to fear, but the unease was undeniable. Then, the lights behind her shifted. Red and blue strobes flared to life, slicing through the night like sirens of judgment. The flashing lights reflected in her mirrors, and her heart sank. A police car. She slowed the sedan and pulled over to the shoulder, switching off the engine. As she sat waiting, she adjusted her posture, a quiet determination settling over her. Diana Carter was no stranger to confrontations, but this felt different, an intrusion, an affront. From the patrol car, Officer Karen White stepped out, her stride deliberate, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. She approached the vehicle, her expression unreadable, but her body language screamed authority, bordering on hostility. Inside the patrol car moments earlier, Karen had made a call to a colleague. "Got an out-of-state plate here, suspicious looking. These people think they can drive in like they own the place." The response from the other end was muffled, but Karen's smirk was visible in the rearview mirror. She hung up, confident she was about to uncover something illicit. Now, standing by Diana's car window, Karen rapped on the glass with a sharp knuckle. Diana lowered the window, meeting Karen's gaze evenly. "License and registration," Karen demanded, her tone clipped, devoid of courtesy. Diana retrieved her documents, her movements measured. "Good evening, officer. May I ask what this is about?" "You were swerving," Karen replied, though her accusation was unfounded. "I don't believe I was," Diana said firmly, handing over her paperwork. "But if there's a concern, I'll cooperate fully." Karen took the documents, her eyes narrowing as she scanned them. "Out-of-state plates. What brings you to Ravenwood?" "I'm here on official business," Diana replied. Karen's lips curled into a faint sneer. "Official business. What kind of business requires you to speed through our town?" Diana remained calm. "I wasn't speeding, officer, and as I said, I'm here on work related to the community." Karen leaned closer, the beam of her flashlight catching the reflection in Diana's eyes. "Step out of the car." Diana hesitated. "Is that really necessary?" Karen's hand hovered near her holster, her voice dropping in tone. "I won't ask again." The tension was palpable. Diana unclipped her seatbelt and stepped out of the vehicle, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She stood tall, her composure intact, even as Karen scrutinized her every move. Karen's flashlight swept over the car interior before she barked, "Hands on the hood!" Diana complied, her jaw tightening. She didn't resist as Karen began patting her down, but the indignity of the moment was clear. "What exactly are you looking for, officer?" Diana asked, her voice steady but tinged with restrained frustration. Karen didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out her radio, murmuring something unintelligible. A few moments later, she turned back to Diana, her expression hardening further. "You've got something to hide, don't you?" Karen said, her voice dripping with insinuation. Diana straightened, meeting Karen's gaze with unflinching resolve. "I have nothing to hide, and I'll remind you, I'm well within my rights." Karen's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, her radio crackled. She stepped away momentarily, muttering into the device. When she returned, her demeanor had only grown colder. "You're under suspicion, and until we clear this up, you're staying with me," Karen announced, snapping handcuffs onto Diana's wrists with a practiced twist. Diana winced but kept her composure. You're making a mistake, officer. Karen's sneer returned. We'll see about that. As Karen guided Diana toward the patrol car, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on both women. The silent streets of Ravenwood bore witness to an encounter that was anything but routine. The metallic click of handcuffs reverberated in the stillness of the night as Karen White secured them around Diana Carter's wrists. The senator stood tall despite the humiliating gesture, her gaze unwavering as she locked eyes with the officer. You're making a serious mistake, Diana stated, her tone firm but measured. Karen's smirk deepened, the faint glow of her flashlight reflecting her disdain. I don't think so. People like you think you're above the law. I haven't broken any laws, Diana responded calmly. And if you believe I have, I'd like to see the evidence. Karen's voice grew sharper. Your attitude is evidence enough. Hands on the hood. Now. Diana complied without resistance, her composure intact. The cuffs bit into her wrists, but her voice carried no sign of weakness. This isn't how justice works, officer. You're overstepping. Karen ignored the remark, patting Diana down in brusque, exaggerated movements. The search was less about protocol and more about asserting dominance. Where's the recording equipment? Karen sneered, casting a glance into Diana's car. Out of state, claiming official business, sounds convenient. Diana straightened slightly. If this is how you treat every driver, officer, I'm surprised you haven't faced consequences yet. Karen's eyes narrowed. You watch your mouth. I decide how things go here, not you. As the tension simmered, the faint sound of footsteps approached from the shadows. A man, casually dressed and holding a smartphone, emerged from the corner. He stood a distance away but had his phone raised, recording the interaction. Karen noticed immediately. Hey, step back, she barked, her free hand gesturing sharply. The man didn't move. I'm just filming. Everyone has a right to see what's going on, he replied, his tone defiant but calm. Turn it off and leave, Karen snapped, taking a step toward him. This is a police matter, and you're interfering. Diana's voice cut through the exchange. Let him record. It's a public road. Karen whirled back to face her. Did I ask for your opinion? The bystander hesitated but continued filming, his phone trembling slightly in his hand. Karen strode toward him, her flashlight now aimed directly at his face. One more step, and I'll arrest you for obstruction, she threatened, her voice cold. Realizing the potential danger, the man retreated, but his phone remained pointed in their direction. I'm not breaking any laws, he muttered before disappearing into the shadows. Karen returned her focus to Diana, her frustration evident in her rigid posture. People think a badge gives them the right to question everything, she muttered, yanking the cuffs on Diana's wrists slightly tighter. Diana winced but refused to show any further reaction. You're only proving my point, officer. Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Your point won't matter where you're going. Diana glanced down at her pocket. Then you won't mind if I document this as well, she said, moving to retrieve her phone. Karen's reaction was immediate and forceful. She snatched the phone from Diana's grasp before she could even unlock it. Nice try. This is evidence now, Karen declared, pocketing the device. You have no right to confiscate that, Diana said sharply. Karen laughed, short and harsh. I don't need your permission. Diana's patience, though formidable, was beginning to wear thin. What exactly are you hoping to find, officer? Or is this just an abuse of power dressed up as law enforcement? Karen's face reddened. Abuse of power? She repeated, her voice rising. The only abuse here is people like you thinking the rules don't apply. People like me? Diana challenged, raising an eyebrow. You mean someone who knows their rights? Someone who expects accountability? The sarcasm in Diana's tone only fueled Karen's anger. She grabbed Diana by the arm, spinning her toward the patrol car. Enough of this! You're coming with me! Karen pushed Diana forward, the senator's shoulder brushing against the metal door of the police vehicle. Get in! Karen ordered, shoving her unceremoniously into the back seat. Diana landed awkwardly, but regained her composure quickly. You'll regret this, she said evenly, her voice carrying more certainty than threat. Not likely, Karen replied, slamming the door shut. She took a step back, glaring at the shadowed streets as if daring anyone else to intervene. From inside the vehicle, Diana observed Karen pacing, her figure lit intermittently by the flashing lights of the patrol car. It was clear Karen wasn't just enforcing the law. She was relishing the control, the unchecked authority that came with the badge. Moments later, Karen climbed into the driver's seat, her jaw tight. Let's see how you like answering questions for a change, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for Diana to hear. Diana leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but piercing. You're making assumptions about me based on your biases. That says more about you than me. Karen shot her a glance in the rearview mirror, her eyes cold. "You don't know me, don't I?" Diana countered. "Because everything about your behavior tonight speaks volumes." The silence that followed was tense, charged with unspoken animosity. Karen gripped the steering wheel tighter, the patrol car lurching forward as she pulled onto the main road. Outside, the man who had been filming reappeared from the shadows, his phone now pointed at the car as it disappeared into the distance. The confrontation had left an indelible mark on the quiet town of Ravenwood, a clash of authority and defiance, of power and principles. The quiet hum of Ravenwood's gossip circles turned into a roar when a video surfaced online. A grainy, shaky clip captured Officer Karen White during a traffic stop with a young Latino man. The man, visibly confused, stood next to his battered pickup truck, hands raised slightly in a gesture of compliance. "You didn't stop at the sign," Karen barked, her voice cutting through the video. "I swear, officer, I stopped." "Don't argue with me," Karen interrupted, stepping closer to him, her hand resting dangerously on her holster. The man looked around nervously, clearly out of his depth. In the background, another voice, low but audible, muttered, "She's always like this." The clip ended abruptly, but the damage was done. Within hours, the video gained traction, shared and reshared across social media. The comments ranged from outrage to weary acknowledgement. Typical Karen White. "She's been like this for years. Why is she still on the force?" At the Ravenwood Police Department, the atmosphere was tense. Karen entered the station, her boots clicking against the floor, her expression hard. She could feel the stares from her colleagues. "White," a fellow officer called out, waving her over to his desk. Officer Mike Daniels, a man nearing retirement, leaned back in his chair, the computer screen in front of him displaying the now viral video. "You've seen this yet?" Karen frowned. "What is it?" Daniels turned the monitor toward her. "Your stop with that kid last month. It's all over the internet." Karen's jaw tightened as she watched the footage. "So what? He was breaking the law." Daniels sighed, lowering his voice. "Karen, this looks bad. People are talking. You've got a reputation and not the good kind." She crossed her arms. "I was doing my job. If people can't handle that, it's their problem." Daniels hesitated. "Look, I'm just saying, maybe take it easy for a while. Lay low." Karen's glare was icy. "I'm not changing how I do my job because some wannabe activist thinks they know better. The law's the law." "Is it?" a voice interrupted. Officer Miguel Torres stepped into the room, a file tucked under his arm. "Or is it just your version of it?" Karen turned sharply to face him. "Got something to say, Torres?" Torres didn't flinch. "Plenty, but let's start with this. You keep pushing people around like they don't matter, and it's going to catch up to you." Karen's laugh was short and bitter. "You think I care what some internet warriors have to say about me? They don't know what it's like out there. They know enough to see a pattern," Torres shot back. "And so do we." Karen stepped closer to him, her voice low and venomous. "If you've got a problem with how I do things, file a complaint. Otherwise, stay out of my way." Torres held her gaze, unshaken. "Maybe I will." As Torres walked away, Daniels shook his head. "You've made your share of enemies, Karen. Don't let your pride dig you deeper." Karen ignored him, storming off to her desk. Meanwhile, the video's ripple effect reached beyond the department. Local community leaders began organizing meetings to discuss the growing concern over police conduct in Ravenwood. Stories began to surface. Accounts of Karen White's abrasive stops, her quick temper, her tendency to escalate situations unnecessarily. "She pulled me over for having a taillight out and threatened to tow my car," one woman shared during a meeting at the community center. "She accused me of stealing my own truck," another man added, his voice heavy with frustration. The stories painted a grim picture, each new account adding weight to the public outcry. At the police department, the tension mounted as Chief Raymond Halstead called Karen into his office. "You're making headlines, White," he began, tossing a printed news article onto his desk. Karen picked it up, her eyes scanning the headline. "Ravenwood officer's history of controversial stops comes to light." She dropped the paper. "It's blown out of proportion. I've done nothing wrong." Halstead's tone hardened. "That's not what it looks like to the public. We've got people calling for your badge. You need to get ahead of this before it gets worse." Karen leaned forward, her voice defiant. "I've followed procedure every single time. If they want to make me the villain, that's their problem." Halstead's expression darkened. "Don't act like you're untouchable, Karen. We both know the department can't afford another scandal." She smirked. "Then maybe the department should back me instead of bowing to the mob." Halstead stared at her, his patience wearing thin. "This isn't a game, White. You're walking a fine line, and I won't cover for you if you cross it." Karen stood, her posture rigid. "Then I guess I'll just make sure I don't cross it." As she left his office, the murmurs of her colleagues followed her. At home that evening, Karen scrolled through her phone, ignoring the flood of notifications from news outlets and social media. The comments under the viral video were relentless. Fire her. She's a disgrace to the badge. This is why people don't trust the police. She tossed the phone onto the couch, muttering, "They don't know anything." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Daniels. "Don't say I didn't warn you." Karen stared at the screen for a moment before deleting the message. The backlash against Karen White wasn't just a reflection of her actions, but a symptom of a broader issue. Ravenwood was waking up to the reality of a system that allowed officers like Karen to thrive unchecked. The community's outrage wasn't just about one video or one officer. It was about years of silent frustration finally finding a voice. The cold fluorescent lights of the Ravenwood police station cast harsh shadows as Officer Karen White led Senator Diana Carter inside. The muffled conversations of officers halted momentarily as they turned to observe. Diana, hands cuffed and chin held high, ignored the whispers and smirks. "Got another one, White?" An officer called from the back, eliciting chuckles from a few others. Karen smirked, her grip tightening on Diana's arm. "Yep, caught her late night cruising. Out-of-state plates. Thought she could speed through town unnoticed." Diana didn't flinch. "Speeding. Is that what we're calling this now?" Karen didn't respond. Instead, she escorted Diana to the booking area and shoved her into a chair. "Sit tight," she barked. As Karen walked away, Miguel Torres, a younger officer standing nearby, watched the exchange with a furrowed brow. Something didn't sit right with him. He glanced at Diana, then back at Karen, who was now laughing with a group of officers. "Who's that?" Torres asked a colleague. "Just another troublemaker," the officer shrugged. "Karen's specialty." Torres didn't look convinced. He lingered for a moment before stepping over to the desk where Diana's belongings were being cataloged. His curiosity grew when he spotted her ID card. "Senator Diana Carter," he murmured, the title catching his attention. His eyes flicked toward Karen, who was too busy recounting her version of the arrest to notice. Torres quickly accessed the department's system, typing in Diana's name. Within seconds, her profile appeared on the screen. Senator of the State Judiciary Committee. His stomach tightened as he scrolled through her credentials. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. Meanwhile, outside the station, a small group of people had gathered. News of Diana's arrest had spread quickly, fueled by whispers and a few social media posts. They held their phones up, recording the scene as they called out for answers. "Why is she being held?" one man demanded. "We saw the video! This is wrong!" another shouted. Inside, Karen noticed the commotion through the window. She rolled her eyes. "Great, now the circus is here." One of her colleagues leaned over. "You want us to clear them out?" "No," Karen said with a smirk. "Let them yell. They'll get bored and leave." Torres couldn't shake the unease settling in his chest. He approached Karen, holding a printout of Diana's profile. "Karen," he began cautiously. Karen turned to face him, her expression already defensive. "What?" "We've got a problem," Torres said, handing her the printout. Karen snatched the paper and scanned it, her smirk fading as her eyes widened. This has to be a mistake." "It's not," Torres said firmly. "She's a sitting senator, Karen. She chairs the Judiciary Committee." Karen's grip on the paper tightened, her jaw clenching. "She didn't tell me that. Did you even ask?" Torres shot back. Karen glared at him. "Don't start with me, Torres. She was acting suspicious." "She wasn't," Torres interrupted. His voice grew louder, drawing the attention of nearby officers. "You pulled her over for no reason, didn't you?" "Back off," Karen hissed. The room grew tense as the officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Daniels, stepped forward. "Torres, let it go. Karen knows what she's doing." "Does she?" Torres snapped. "Or are we just supposed to cover for her every time she crosses a line?" Daniels raised his hands defensively. "Hey, no one's saying anything about covering, but you're out of line." "No, he's not," Diana interjected, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. All eyes turned to her. She stood, her composure unshaken despite the cuffs on her wrists. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened, is it?" Karen stepped forward, her face a mix of anger and frustration. "Sit down." Diana didn't move. "What's the matter, Officer White? Afraid the truth might come out?" Karen's fists clenched, but before she could respond, Chief Raymond Halstead entered the room. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his authoritative voice silencing the chaos. Torres immediately stepped forward. "Chief, we have a serious issue. This woman," he gestured to Diana, "is Senator Diana Carter. She was arrested without cause." Halstead's eyes darted between Torres, Diana, and Karen. "Is this true?" Karen hesitated. She was speeding? Diana interrupted, her tone laced with sarcasm. Or was it my out-of-state plates? Maybe it was just my attitude, as your officer so eloquently put it. Halstead's jaw tightened. White, in my office. Now. Karen opened her mouth to protest but thought better of it, storming off toward the chief's office. In the privacy of Halstead's office, Karen paced back and forth as the chief reviewed Diana's profile. This is a PR nightmare waiting to happen, Halstead said, slamming the file onto his desk. She didn't tell me who she was, Karen defended, her voice rising. Did you ask? Halstead shot back. Karen faltered. No, but then you had no business escalating the situation, Halstead said coldly. Do you realize what you've done? You arrested a sitting senator, Karen. This isn't going away. Karen folded her arms, defiance still flickering in her eyes. She was acting suspicious. Cut the crap, Halstead snapped. You've been pushing boundaries for years, and now it's blowing up in our faces. Karen's face hardened, but she said nothing. This isn't just about you anymore, Halstead continued. It's about this entire department. We're under a microscope now, thanks to you. Outside the office, the tension among the officers was palpable. Torres approached Diana, unlocking her cuffs. I'm sorry about all of this, he said quietly. Diana looked at him, her expression unreadable. Don't apologize for her mistakes, but thank you for doing the right thing. Torres nodded, his resolve strengthening. As the commotion outside the station grew louder, Halstead emerged from his office, his face grim. White, you're suspended until further notice. Karen's head snapped toward him. You can't be serious. I am, Halstead said firmly. Hand over your badge and gun. Karen hesitated, but eventually complied, slamming them onto his desk. She stormed out of the room, her anger palpable. The gathered officers exchanged uneasy glances as Diana stood tall, her presence commanding. Chief Halstead, she said, her voice calm but firm. You've got a bigger problem than me, and it's not going to go away just because you suspend one officer. Halstead's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. With Karen's suspension and the truth about Diana's identity out in the open, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundation of Ravenwood's justice system. The double doors of the Ravenwood police station swung open with a force that made every head in the room turn. Samuel Carter entered, his tall frame exuding authority and urgency. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Chief Raymond Halstead, who was speaking to two officers by the front desk. Chief Halstead, Samuel said, his voice sharp and commanding. Where is my wife? Halstead straightened, his expression unreadable but wary. Mr. Carter, this isn't the place to... Samuel interrupted, stepping closer. Don't patronize me. My wife, Senator Diana Carter, was brought here under false pretenses. I want to see her, now. Halstead motioned for the other officers to leave. Once they were out of earshot, he spoke in a low, firm tone. Mr. Carter, this is a police matter. We're handling it. Samuel's eyes blazed. Handling it? By arresting her without cause and treating her like a criminal? Is that what you call handling it? Halstead sighed, his tone hardening. This isn't the place for a debate. She's in the process of being released. You'll see her soon enough. That's not good enough, Samuel snapped. I want an explanation for why she was detained in the first place, and I want it now. The tension between the two men was palpable. Halstead's authority as chief clashed with Samuel's unwavering resolve. Karen White made the arrest. Halstead admitted after a pause. There was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Samuel's voice rose. That's what you're calling this? A blatant abuse of power? Halstead's jaw tightened. I've already suspended her. We're dealing with it internally. That's not justice, Samuel retorted. That's damage control. And it's not going to fly. As their argument escalated, Torres approached cautiously, holding a flash drive in his hand. Mr. Carter, he began, glancing at Halstead before continuing. There's something you need to see. Halstead shot him a warning look. Torres, this isn't the time. Samuel ignored the chief, his attention fixed on Torres. What is it? Torres hesitated, but handed Samuel the flash drive. It's the body cam footage from the arrest. You deserve to know what happened. Halstead's voice was sharp. Torres, you're out of line. Am I? Torres countered. This is a sitting senator we're talking about. The public deserves to know the truth, and so does her husband. Samuel wasted no time. He pulled out his phone and connected the drive. As he watched the footage, his face darkened. The video captured Karen's aggressive tone, her baseless accusations, and the rough treatment of Diana during the arrest. This is unacceptable, Samuel said, his voice cold. He turned to Halstead. If you think I'm letting this slide, you're sorely mistaken. Mr. Carter, Halstead started. No, Samuel interrupted, his voice rising. You listen to me. This is going public. Every second of this footage, every detail of your department's misconduct. And if that means dragging this precinct through the mud, so be it. Halstead stepped forward, lowering his voice. You need to think carefully about your next move. This department? Samuel cut him off. This department enabled an officer like Karen White. That tells me everything I need to know. Samuel didn't stop there. He stepped outside, where the growing crowd of protesters stood, holding signs and chanting for justice. The flashing lights of news cameras illuminated the scene. Samuel raised his hands, quieting the crowd. My name is Samuel Carter, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. My wife, Senator Diana Carter, was unlawfully arrested tonight. And now, I've seen the proof with my own eyes. The abuse of power, the mistreatment, and the lies. The crowd erupted in murmurs, their anger building. This isn't just about Diana, Samuel continued. This is about every person in this community who's been silenced, intimidated, and oppressed by a broken system. Well, that ends tonight. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every word. I'm calling on every journalist, every advocate, every citizen who believes in justice to stand with us, Samuel said, his voice rising. Because this fight isn't just ours, it's yours too. The crowd cheered, their voices echoing through the night. Inside the station, Halstead watched the scene unfold from the window, his expression grim. Karen, who had been lingering nearby, stepped up beside him. This is getting out of hand, she muttered. Halstead shot her a look. It's already out of hand thanks to you. Karen scoffed. So what? We've dealt with worse. Halstead's tone was icy. Not like this. You arrested a senator, Karen. This isn't going away. She didn't respond, her jaw tightening as she turned away. Meanwhile, Diana was released from the holding area and escorted to the lobby. Samuel met her halfway, pulling her into a protective embrace. Are you okay? He asked, his voice low. I'm fine, Diana replied, her tone calm but resolute. But this isn't over. Samuel nodded, his expression matching hers. I know, and I've already started. Together they walked outside, the crowd erupting into applause as they appeared. Samuel raised Diana's hand, their unity a symbol of strength against the injustice they faced. Back inside, Torres watched from the window, a small smile tugging at his lips. Daniels, standing nearby, sighed. You really went for it, didn't you? Torres didn't look away from the crowd. Someone had to. Daniels nodded slowly. Well, good luck. You're going to need it. Miguel Torres entered Chief Halstead's office, his expression grim. In his hand was a folder containing copies of the footage he had secretly shared with Diana Carter's legal team. Halstead, seated behind his desk, looked up sharply. This better be important, Torres, Halstead said. It is, Torres replied, placing the folder on the desk. This is everything from the body cam and station cameras the night Senator Carter was arrested. You need to see it. Halstead leaned back, his eyes narrowing. I thought we were clear about handling this internally. Torres shook his head. With all due respect, Chief, this isn't something we can bury. The footage speaks for itself. Karen crossed every line, and you know it. Halstead exhaled heavily and opened the folder. As he scanned the contents, his face darkened. Karen White's voice came through clearly on the body cam transcript. Her sharp accusations, unwarranted hostility, and complete disregard for protocol. This is bad, Halstead muttered, rubbing his temples. It's more than bad, Torres said firmly. It's indefensible. Halstead looked up, his expression conflicted. You realize what this means if it gets out. The department will take the fall. And if we don't act, Torres countered. It's already out there, Chief. The public knows. If we don't hold her accountable, we're no better than her. Halstead's jaw tightened. After a moment, he stood. Get White in here, now. Karen White entered the office, her stride confident, but her expression wary. She immediately noticed the tension in the room. What's going on? Karen asked, her eyes darting between Halstead and Torres. Halstead didn't mince words. We have a problem, Karen. The footage from your arrest of Senator Carter, it's damning. Karen's smirk faltered. Damning? I followed procedure. Torres interjected, his voice steady but firm. No, you didn't. You escalated without cause, ignored protocol, and treated her with blatant disrespect. Karen shot him a glare. Stay out of this, Torres. I can't, Torres replied. This isn't just about you, Karen. It's about the department, the people we're supposed to serve. You've made a mockery of that. Karen turned back to Halstead, her voice rising. You're going to take his side. Over mine? This isn't about sides, Halstead said coldly. It's about accountability. And right now, you're a liability. Karen's fists clenched at her sides. You've got to be kidding me. I've been on this force for years. And in that time, you've built a reputation we can't defend anymore, Halstead interrupted. Effective immediately. You're suspended. Karen's eyes widened in shock. Suspended? You can't be serious. I am, Halstead replied. Turn in your badge and gun. Karen's face turned red with anger. This is ridiculous. You're throwing me under the bus to save face. No, Halstead said firmly. I'm doing what should have been done a long time ago. You've left me no choice. Karen hesitated, her jaw tightening as if she wanted to argue further. But the weight of the situation was clear. Slowly, she unhooked her badge and removed her gun, placing them on the desk with a sharp thud. You'll regret this, she said, her voice low and seething. Maybe, Halstead replied. But not as much as I'd regret doing nothing. Karen turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. In the hallway, Karen passed a group of officers who had gathered, their whispers barely concealed. She shot them a venomous glare. Enjoy the show while you can, she muttered before disappearing down the corridor. Torres emerged from the office moments later, his expression unreadable. Daniels approached him cautiously. You really went all in, huh? Daniels said. Someone had to, Torres replied. You're braver than me, Daniels muttered. Meanwhile, Diana's legal team was already at work. Cynthia Blake, her lead attorney, reviewed the footage Torres had provided. Her sharp eyes picked apart every detail, from Karen's tone to her blatant disregard for Diana's rights. This is gold, Cynthia said, leaning back in her chair. They handed us everything we need to tear their case apart. Diana nodded, her expression calm but resolute. It's not just about the case, Cynthia. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else. We'll make that happen, Cynthia assured her. Back at the station, Halstead called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The room was filled with tension as officers debated the fallout of Karen's suspension. This is going to blow up in our faces, one officer said. Maybe it should, Torres replied sharply. This department has been turning a blind eye for too long. It's time we clean up. You think throwing Karen under the bus will fix everything? Another officer shot back. It's a start, Torres said. Halstead raised a hand, silencing the room. Enough. The decision has been made. What we need to focus on now is how to regain the trust of this community. And how do we do that? Someone asked. By doing better, Halstead said simply. And by holding ourselves accountable. Outside the station, the crowd of protesters continued to grow. Chants for justice filled the air, and news cameras captured every moment. Among the crowd stood Samuel Carter, his presence a reminder that this fight wasn't going away. As Torres looked out the window at the scene below, a sense of resolve settled over him. This wasn't just about one officer or one incident. It was about changing a system that had been broken for far too long. The law office buzzed with quiet intensity as Diana Carter sat across from her attorney, Cynthia Adams. A thick folder of documents lay between them, filled with evidence, testimonies, and strategy notes. Cynthia flipped through the pages, her sharp gaze dissecting every detail. We have a solid case, Cynthia began, her tone crisp. But we're going up against an institution that's built to protect itself. This won't be easy. Diana nodded. I didn't expect it to be. But this isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been silenced by people like Karen White. Cynthia leaned forward, her expression serious. If we're going to win, we need more than just the footage. We need witnesses, documents, anything that proves this isn't an isolated incident. The next day, Cynthia and her team delved into the department's records. What they uncovered was damning. Several reports related to Karen's previous stops were heavily redacted, with key details missing. One document in particular stood out. A complaint filed by a young man who had accused Karen of excessive force during a traffic stop. The report had been dismissed with a single line. Insufficient evidence. Cynthia frowned, tapping the paper. This isn't just negligence. It's deliberate. Cover-ups, Diana said, her voice steady but firm. Exactly, Cynthia agreed. And we're going to expose them. As the investigation continued, Diana made it her mission to connect with those who had suffered under Karen's authority. She met with a young Latino man named Alex, the driver from the viral video that had sparked the community's outrage. Alex sat across from Diana in a small coffee shop, his hands clenched tightly around his cup. I didn't do anything wrong, he said, his voice shaking. But she treated me like I was a criminal. I believe you, Diana said, her voice calm but encouraging. And you don't have to stay silent anymore. If you're willing to testify, your story could make a difference. Alex hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. What if they come after me? What if this makes things worse? Diana leaned forward. That's why we're fighting this together. You're not alone in this, Alex. And the only way to change the system is to stand up to it. After a long pause, Alex nodded. Okay, I'll do it. The team's efforts soon led them to Maria Lopez, a single mother who had filed a complaint against Karen years ago. Maria's case had been quietly closed without action, but her story was strikingly similar to Diana's. I was driving my kids home from school, Maria recounted, her voice tinged with bitterness. She pulled me over, accused me of speeding, and then started yelling when I tried to explain. My kids were terrified. Why didn't you pursue it further? Cynthia asked. Maria shook her head. What was the point? They didn't care. She was one of them. This time is different, Diana said. We're not letting this go. Maria's gaze softened. If it means making sure she can't do this to anyone else, I'm in. Back at the office, Cynthia prepared the official filing. The lawsuit named Karen White and the Ravenwood Police Department, accusing them of systemic misconduct, abuse of power, and intentional negligence. As Cynthia reviewed the draft, she called Diana into the conference room. This isn't just a case against Karen. It's a case against the entire system that allowed her to thrive. Are you ready for what's coming? Diana's expression was resolute. I've been ready for this my whole life. The lawsuit was filed the next morning, and the news spread like wildfire. Headlines across the state read, Senator Carter sues police department over wrongful arrest. The response was immediate. Activists praised Diana's courage, while law enforcement officials scrambled to defend the department. Press conferences were held, with Ravenwood's mayor promising a thorough review of the police force. But behind the scenes, the pushback was fierce. The department's lawyers filed motions to dismiss the case, claiming procedural errors. Anonymous threats flooded Diana's email inbox. Standard tactics, Cynthia said dismissively, forwarding the emails to the authorities. They're trying to intimidate you. Don't let them. I won't, Diana replied. As the court date approached, the legal team intensified their preparations. Cynthia secured additional witnesses, including former officers who had worked with Karen and witnessed her behavior firsthand. One officer, speaking anonymously, described Karen's tactics as aggressive and unnecessary. Another admitted that complaints against her had been ignored because she got results. Cynthia summarized the strategy during a late-night meeting with the team. We're going to show that Karen White isn't just one bad apple. She's a symptom of a rotten system, and we'll use their own records to prove it. The pressure mounted as media coverage grew. Diana gave interviews, emphasizing the broader implications of the case. This isn't about me, she said on a popular news program. This is about accountability. It's about ensuring that no one, regardless of their status, is above the law, not even those who are supposed to enforce it. Her words resonated, galvanizing public support. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse in anticipation of the trial, holding signs that read, "Justice for all" and "No more abuse." Inside the Ravenwood Police Department, the mood was tense. Officers debated the case among themselves, with some defending Karen and others expressing relief that action was finally being taken. Torres, watching the unfolding events, felt a mix of pride and apprehension. He had taken a risk by sharing the footage, but seeing the momentum behind Diana's fight reassured him that it was worth it. On the eve of the trial, Cynthia met with Diana in her office. The weight of the case hung in the air, but neither woman wavered. "We've done everything we can to prepare," Cynthia said. "Tomorrow it's up to the court." "And the truth," Diana added. Cynthia smiled faintly. "The truth is on our side. Let's make sure everyone sees it." As the courtroom doors opened, the trial became a spectacle, drawing attention from across the nation. The fight for justice was no longer just Diana's, it was everyone's. Diana Carter sat under the harsh studio lights, her posture poised, her gaze unwavering. Across from her, the anchor adjusted their microphone, preparing for the live segment. The studio buzzed with activity, but Diana's focus remained on the camera lens that would soon transmit her words to millions. "We're live in 3, 2, 1, the producer signaled. The anchor began. "Good evening. Tonight, we're joined by Senator Diana Carter, who recently filed a lawsuit against the Ravenwood Police Department over her wrongful arrest. Senator, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me," Diana replied, her voice steady. "Let's get straight to it," the anchor said. "Your arrest has sparked national outrage. Can you walk us through what happened that night?" Diana nodded, her expression resolute. "I was driving home from a community meeting when I was pulled over without cause. The officer, Karen White, claimed I was speeding, an allegation that was entirely false. What followed was a series of actions that violated my rights. I was handcuffed, humiliated, and treated as though I were guilty of some unspoken crime. All because of an officer's bias and abuse of power." The anchor leaned forward. "Some critics argue that this could have been resolved quietly. Why take it to court?" "Because silence enables injustice," Diana said firmly. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been silenced, dismissed, or mistreated by those in power. If I have the platform to speak out, I have a responsibility to use it." The camera cut to a live feed of protesters outside the courthouse, their chants audible through the screen. Signs reading, "Justice for Diana" and "End Police Abuse" filled the frame. The interview aired across major networks, and within hours, Diana's words went viral. Clips of her recounting the night of her arrest flooded social media, sparking hashtags like "Justice for Diana" and "Notch End Police Bias." Celebrities, activists, and everyday citizens joined the conversation, amplifying her message. But not all the reactions were supportive. In a parallel broadcast, a commentator on a pro-law enforcement network took aim at Diana. "This so-called fight for justice is nothing more than a publicity stunt," the host declared. "Senator Carter is using this incident to further her own political agenda, painting all officers as villains. Where's the respect for the men and women who put their lives on the line every day?" The segment featured interviews with anonymous officers defending Karen White. "She's one of the best," one voice claimed. "This is a witch hunt, plain and simple." The network displayed footage of Karen during a community event years prior, handing out school supplies to children. The narrative was clear. Karen was a scapegoat, and Diana was the aggressor. The media frenzy fueled public debate. Online forums and comment sections became battlegrounds. "She's brave for standing up against this," one user wrote. "Brave. She's exploiting this for attention," another countered. The division was stark, but the noise only heightened the case's visibility. Diana refused to back down. She continued granting interviews, each one sharpening her message. During a live stream with a prominent social justice influencer, Diana addressed the backlash directly. "Let me be clear," she said, her tone unyielding. "This isn't about demonizing the police. It's about accountability. The badge is a symbol of trust, and when that trust is broken, it must be addressed. Otherwise, we risk losing faith in the entire system." The influencer nodded. "And what do you say to those accusing you of playing politics?" "This isn't politics," Diana replied. "It's humanity. Justice isn't partisan, it's a right. As the trial date approached, the tension grew. Journalists camped outside the courthouse, their cameras capturing every arrival and departure. Diana's legal team released a statement highlighting the broader implications of the case. This lawsuit isn't just about one officer or one arrest, Cynthia Adams said in a press conference. It's about challenging a system that allows prejudice to flourish unchecked. Our goal is to ensure that no one else has to endure what Senator Carter experienced. The press conference was interrupted by a group of counter-protesters, waving signs that read, "Support law enforcement," and chanting, "Justice for Karen." Diana watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. The louder they shout, the clearer it becomes how necessary this fight is, she told Cynthia. Behind the scenes, the media coverage took its toll on Karen White. She sat in her dimly lit living room, flipping through channels as every major network dissected the case. "This is all exaggerated," she muttered, tossing the remote onto the couch. Her phone buzzed incessantly, messages from supporters and critics alike. One particularly harsh email caught her eye. "You're everything wrong with the system." Karen threw her phone onto the table, her hands trembling. Meanwhile, public pressure mounted on the Ravenwood Police Department. The mayor announced the formation of an independent review board to investigate claims of misconduct. Activist groups demanded transparency, releasing open letters urging state officials to intervene. "The world is watching," one activist declared during a televised rally. "This case is about more than one officer. It's about dismantling a culture of abuse." Diana's media strategy wasn't just about garnering sympathy. It was about galvanizing change. Her team released a series of video testimonials from other victims of police misconduct, their stories interwoven with Diana's. One clip featured Maria Lopez, who recounted her harrowing experience with Karen White. "I thought no one would believe me," Maria said, her voice cracking. "But now, I see that I wasn't alone." The video struck a chord, gaining millions of views and sparking renewed calls for reform. As the media storm intensified, Diana remained focused. In her final televised interview before the trial, she issued a direct challenge. "To those who doubt me, who question my motives, I say this: come to the courtroom, see the evidence, hear the testimonies, and then decide for yourself if this is about politics or justice." The anchor looked at her, visibly impressed. "Senator Carter, your determination is remarkable. Do you believe this case will lead to real change?" "I don't just believe it," Diana said, her voice resolute. "I'm counting on it." With the nation's eyes fixed on Ravenwood, the courtroom became a stage for a battle that would define the future of justice and accountability. Karen White sat in her car in the empty precinct parking lot, staring blankly at the dashboard. The precinct had become a hostile environment, and for the first time in her career, she felt truly alone. Colleagues who once shared casual banter now avoided her. Some refused to even meet her gaze. The weight of the suspension, the media frenzy, and the whispers behind her back pressed heavily on her. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was yet another notification, a news alert. Karen White, the officer at the center of a scandal. She didn't bother to open it. Instead, she gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles whitening as frustration boiled over. "Damn it," she muttered, slamming her fist against the dashboard. Inside the station, the atmosphere remained tense. Officers worked quietly, but occasional glances toward Karen's empty desk betrayed their thoughts. Miguel Torres sat at his desk, reviewing case files, when Officer Daniels approached, a file in hand. "Guess who's finally getting what she deserves?" Daniels muttered, dropping the file on Torres's desk. Torres opened it, his brows furrowing. "Another complaint against White?" "From 5 years ago," Daniels confirmed. "The guy she roughed up filed a formal report, but it was buried, probably by Halstead." Torres scanned the report. It was a familiar pattern: an unwarranted stop, accusations of non-compliance, and excessive force. "How many more of these are there?" "Enough to bury her," Daniels replied, his tone grim. Later that evening, Karen sat alone in her dimly lit apartment. She scrolled through her contacts, hesitating before finally pressing call on Diana Carter's number. The line rang several times before going to voicemail. Karen exhaled deeply, then spoke. "Senator Carter, this is Karen White. I wanted to apologize for everything. I know that doesn't fix what happened, but She paused, her voice faltering. I just need you to know I'm sorry. She ended the call and stared at the phone in her hand. Minutes later, a notification appeared. Message failed to send. Diana had blocked her. Karen tossed the phone onto the couch, her frustration growing. What do they want from me? She whispered to herself. The following day, Karen ventured to the grocery store, hoping for a brief escape from the turmoil. But even here, she couldn't avoid the fallout. That's her, someone whispered loudly. She's the one who arrested the senator, another voice said. Karen kept her head down, pretending not to hear. But when a customer deliberately bumped into her cart and muttered, "Disgrace," she abandoned her shopping and left the store. Back at the station, Daniels and Torres reviewed another set of files. One name kept appearing. Maria Lopez, the woman who had recently come forward with allegations against Karen. You think she'd be willing to testify? Torres asked. Daniels shrugged. If she does, it's game over for White. At that moment, Halstead entered the room, his expression unreadable. Torres, Daniels, my office, now. In Halstead's office, the atmosphere was charged. He dropped a stack of documents onto his desk. These are from Internal Affairs, he began. They're opening a formal investigation into White. Every complaint, every incident, it's all being reviewed. Torres exchanged a glance with Daniels. And what about the lawsuit? Halstead sighed. That's going forward too. White's on her own for this one. Daniels raised an eyebrow. You're cutting her loose? We don't have a choice, Halstead said. She's a liability. And this department can't afford any more hits to its reputation. When Karen returned to the station to clear out her belongings, the tension was palpable. Officers avoided her as she walked through the halls, carrying a box of personal items. As she reached her desk, Torres approached her. Karen? She stopped, her expression defensive. What do you want? Torres hesitated before speaking. I know you think this is unfair, but you brought this on yourself. Karen's jaw tightened. I was doing my job. Was that what you were doing when you pulled over Maria Lopez? Or Alex? Or Senator Carter? Torres pressed. Karen glared at him but didn't respond. You can keep telling yourself it was just the job, Torres continued. But deep down, you know it wasn't. Karen slammed the box onto her desk, her voice rising. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Torres replied evenly. Later that evening, Karen sat on her couch, a bottle of whiskey on the table in front of her. She stared at the blank television screen, the echoes of her confrontation with Torres replaying in her mind. Her phone buzzed again, a news alert. Reluctantly, she picked it up. The headline read, New allegations surface against Officer Karen White. Karen's hands shook as she read the article. The story detailed the complaints filed against her, including testimonies from Maria Lopez and Alex. Each line felt like a nail in the coffin of her career. They're out to destroy me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just them. It was her actions, her choices, that had led to this moment. Across town, Diana Carter and Cynthia Adams reviewed the growing list of witnesses willing to testify. Maria Lopez just confirmed, Cynthia said. And Alex is ready too. Diana nodded. This is bigger than I ever imagined. It's not just about one officer. It's about an entire system. And we're going to hold that system accountable, Cynthia replied. The pressure on Karen White continued to mount. With the internal affairs investigation underway, the lawsuit advancing, and her reputation in tatters, she found herself isolated both professionally and personally. The walls she had built to protect herself were crumbling, and the reality of her actions was impossible to ignore. The courtroom was packed, a mixture of media, activists, and concerned citizens filling every seat. At the front, Diana Carter sat beside Cynthia Adams, her attorney, while Karen White occupied the defendant's table, her lawyer flipping through notes. The air was thick with tension as the judge entered and called the court to order. Cynthia rose first, her expression sharp and focused. Your Honor, this case is about accountability. The defendant, Officer Karen White, abused her authority under the guise of law enforcement, violating not only the rights of Senator Diana Carter, but also the trust placed in her by the community. Karen's attorney, a seasoned defender named Richard Lowell, countered, Your Honor, my client acted in accordance with her training. Any claims of abuse are exaggerated and taken out of context. She was doing her job. Cynthia didn't flinch. We'll let the evidence speak for itself. The prosecution wasted no time presenting their case. Cynthia played the body cam footage first, the courtroom falling silent as Karen's voice filled the space. You were swerving, Karen's voice barked on the recording. I wasn't, Diana replied evenly. The footage continued, showing Karen's escalating aggression, her unwarranted search, and her decision to handcuff Diana. The jury's expressions hardened as the video progressed. Cynthia turned to the jury. This is not the behavior of an officer upholding the law. It's the behavior of someone abusing power. Lowell attempted to discredit the footage. What this video doesn't show is the full context of the situation. Officers face split-second decisions every day, and my client was following her instincts to ensure safety. Instincts? Cynthia shot back. Or bias? Next, the prosecution called Maria Lopez to the stand. Maria recounted her encounter with Karen, her voice steady but emotional. She pulled me over for speeding, even though I wasn't. She yelled at me, accused me of lying, and scared my children. I filed a complaint, but nothing happened. Lowell cross-examined her, attempting to undermine her credibility. Mrs. Lopez, isn't it true you've had prior traffic violations? Maria held her ground. That doesn't excuse how she treated me. The turning point came when the man who had recorded Diana's arrest was called as a surprise witness. The defense objected. Your Honor, this witness was not disclosed during pretrial. The judge allowed it. Proceed, but tread carefully. The man, identified as James Rivers, took the stand. I was walking home that night when I saw Senator Carter's car pulled over. Something about the way the officer acted didn't feel right, so I started recording. Cynthia played the video James had captured, which showed Karen forcefully pushing Diana into the patrol car, her voice dripping with disdain. The jury's reactions were immediate. Eyes widened, jaws tightened. Lowell attempted to spin it. Mr. Rivers, would you say you interfered with the officer's duties by recording this? James replied calmly. No, I stayed at a distance. And I wasn't interfering. I was documenting. When Karen took the stand, the tension in the room escalated. Lowell guided her through a rehearsed narrative. Officer White, can you explain your actions that night? Karen clasped her hands tightly. Senator Carter's behavior raised concerns. I followed protocol as I've been trained to do. And the accusations of bias? Lowell asked. I treat every situation the same, Karen insisted. Race, status, none of that matters. My job is to enforce the law. Cynthia rose for the cross-examination. Officer White, you claim to follow protocol. Is that what we saw on the body cam footage? Yelling, unwarranted handcuffing, and dismissing Senator Carter's explanations without cause. Karen shifted in her seat. She was uncooperative. Cynthia pressed harder. Uncooperative. Or unwilling to submit to your abuse of power. Karen's voice rose slightly. I did what I thought was necessary to maintain control. Cynthia's tone sharpened. Necessary? Pushing an unarmed woman into a patrol car? Ignoring her rights? Was that necessary? Karen's lawyer objected. Badgering the witness. The judge nodded. Sustained. Move on, counselor. Cynthia's final question was pointed. Officer White, do you regret your actions that night? Karen hesitated, her confidence wavering. I did what I thought was right. The defense called their final witness, a police trainer who spoke about the challenges officers face in high-pressure situations. Officers must make quick decisions, the trainer explained. It's not an exact science. Mistakes happen, Cynthia rebutted during cross-examination. Would you consider escalating a routine traffic stop into an arrest a mistake? The trainer paused. It depends on the circumstances. Cynthia leaned in. And in this case, with no evidence of wrongdoing, no immediate threat, and clear footage showing the officer's aggression, would you still call it a mistake? Or a deliberate abuse of authority? The trainer had no clear response. In closing arguments, Cynthia addressed the jury with conviction. This isn't just about one night. It's about a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for years. Officer White acted with impunity because she believed she could. Your verdict isn't just about holding her accountable. It's about sending a message that no one is above the law. Lowell countered, appealing to the jury's sense of empathy for law enforcement. Officers like Karen White put their lives on the line every day. This case risks vilifying those who protect us. Don't let one incident erase years of service. The judge dismissed the court for deliberation. The room buzzed with anticipation as the jury filed out. Diana sat silently, her expression calm but determined. Karen, on the other hand, stared at the table in front of her, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Hours later, the jury returned. The four-person rows, holding the verdict. On the charge of misconduct and abuse of power, we find the defendant guilty. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Karen's face fell, her shoulders slumping as the weight of the decision sank in. Diana closed her eyes briefly, a sense of relief washing over her. The words, "guilty as charged," echoed through the courtroom, carrying a weight that silenced the spectators. Karen White sat frozen, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the defendant's table. For the first time, her usual defiance faltered, replaced by a quiet resignation. The judge's voice cut through the tense atmosphere. Officer Karen White is hereby convicted of misconduct and abuse of power. Sentencing will be determined at a later date, pending further review. Whispers rippled through the room. Some murmured approval, while others exchanged wary glances. Outside, the courthouse steps were a sea of emotions. Supporters of Diana Carter erupted into cheers, holding signs reading, "Justice for all" and "Accountability now." Not everyone shared the sentiment. Across the street, a smaller but vocal group of Karen's supporters waved banners that read, "Support our officers," and chanted slogans like, "White was right." The tension between the two groups escalated quickly. A shouting match ensued, and police officers stepped in to form a barrier. "She was just doing her job," one protester yelled, his voice raw with anger. "Her job? Abusing power isn't a job, it's a crime," a counter-protester shot back. For Diana, the scene was a reminder of how deeply divided the community remained. Flanked by her legal team and husband, she stepped out of the courthouse to face the awaiting press. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, and the crowd quieted in anticipation. Diana took a deep breath before addressing the crowd. Today's verdict is a step forward, but it is only the beginning. Justice isn't about one case, one officer, or one department. It's about dismantling a system that allows prejudice and abuse to thrive unchecked. She paused, letting her words sink in. To those who feel this decision is a loss, I want you to understand, this isn't about choosing sides. It's about ensuring that no one, regardless of their uniform or position, is above the law. Her voice grew stronger. I will continue to fight for accountability, for transparency, and for a system that serves and protects everyone equally. This is not the end of the road. It's the start of a journey toward true justice. The crowd erupted into applause. Across the street, Karen's supporters grew louder in their objections, but their voices were drowned out by the overwhelming call for reform. Inside her apartment, Karen watched the broadcast on mute, her expression unreadable. The screen showed Diana standing tall, addressing the nation with unwavering conviction. Karen's phone buzzed with messages, some supportive, most condemning. She tossed the phone aside, retreating into her thoughts. The weight of her conviction settled heavily on her shoulders. For the first time, she wondered if her actions had been as justified as she had convinced herself they were. The impact of the verdict extended far beyond Ravenwood. State and national leaders weighed in, with some praising the decision as a turning point for police accountability. Activists saw it as proof that the system, while flawed, could be challenged. However, law enforcement unions issued statements decrying the verdict. This sets a dangerous precedent, one union leader argued during a press conference. Our officers need support, not condemnation, in these challenging times. The debate spilled onto social media, reigniting discussions about policing practices, systemic racism, and the balance between authority and accountability. Diana's fight didn't stop with the verdict. She immediately began organizing town halls, inviting community members to share their experiences and propose solutions. At one such meeting, a young woman stood and spoke with trembling hands. "My brother was arrested last year for something he didn't do," she said. "We tried to file a complaint, but nothing happened. It felt like no one cared." Diana listened intently, then responded, "Your story matters. Every voice in this room matters. Change starts here, with us coming together to demand better. The room erupted into applause, the energy palpable. Meanwhile, the Ravenwood Police Department faced mounting pressure. Internal Affairs launched a broader investigation, unearthing more incidents of misconduct that had been overlooked or dismissed. Chief Halstead issued a statement acknowledging the department's failures and promising reforms. Though many viewed his words with skepticism, Miguel Torres, once a quiet voice within the department, found himself at the forefront of the push for change. "It's not enough to talk about reform," he said during an interview. "We have to act on it. We need better training, stronger oversight, and a culture that prioritizes integrity over loyalty." Karen's sentencing hearing brought another wave of media attention. Diana chose not to attend, focusing instead on the broader movement she had ignited. Karen, now visibly drained, addressed the court before her sentence was handed down. "I made mistakes," she admitted, her voice subdued. "I believed I was doing my duty, but I see now that I let my biases cloud my judgment. For that, I am deeply sorry." Her words were met with mixed reactions. Some viewed them as a genuine apology, while others saw them as an attempt to mitigate her punishment. The judge handed down a sentence of probation, community service, and mandatory training on bias and de-escalation tactics. It was a decision that sparked further debate, with some arguing it was too lenient, and others seeing it as an opportunity for Karen to learn and grow. Diana stood in her office, looking out at the city skyline. Samuel entered, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," Diana corrected. "But there's still so much more to do." Samuel nodded. "And you'll do it. You've already shown that change is possible." Diana Carter stood at the podium, the weight of the past weeks etched into her face, but softened by a quiet determination. Before her was a solemn crowd gathered in Ravenwood Central Square for a candlelight vigil. The event honored victims of police misconduct, a poignant reminder of the lives impacted by a broken system. Behind her, a large screen displayed images of individuals whose stories had fueled the fight for justice. Alex, Maria Lopez, and others who had finally been heard. Their faces illuminated the evening sky as the crowd stood in silence, candles flickering in their hands. Diana's voice broke the stillness. "Tonight, we remember those who have suffered, those who were silenced, and those who were ignored. But we also honor their courage, the courage to speak out, to demand better, to fight for justice, even when the odds were against them." Applause rippled through the audience, subdued but powerful. The momentum from the trial and its aftermath had sparked tangible change in Ravenwood. The town council passed a series of measures aimed at reforming the police department, including mandatory bias training, the implementation of body cameras, and the creation of an independent oversight committee. Chief Halstead, under mounting scrutiny, announced his resignation, acknowledging his role in allowing misconduct to fester. His replacement, chosen with community input, vowed to rebuild trust through transparency and accountability. Miguel Torres, now promoted to sergeant, played an integral role in shaping the department's new policies. "This is just the beginning," he said during a council meeting. "Real change takes time, but we're finally on the right path." Despite the progress, not everyone embraced the reforms. Small but vocal factions within the community resisted the changes, arguing they unfairly targeted law enforcement. Protests erupted, with signs reading, "Back the Blue" and "Reforms won't keep us safe." Diana faced these challenges head-on. At a town hall meeting, she addressed the concerns with her characteristic calm but firm demeanor. "This isn't about weakening law enforcement," she explained. "It's about strengthening it, ensuring it serves everyone equally and justly. Accountability doesn't undermine safety, it enhances it." Her words were met with mixed reactions, but Diana remained undeterred. She knew that true change required persistence. A pivotal moment came when Ravenwood's newly formed oversight committee held its first public hearing. Victims of past misconduct were invited to share their stories. Maria Lopez stood among them, her voice steady as she recounted her experience once more. "I never thought I'd see the day when my story mattered. But now, it feels like we're finally being heard." The hearing concluded with recommendations for further reforms, signaling that the fight for justice in Ravenwood was far from over, but firmly underway. Diana's work extended beyond the borders of Ravenwood. She joined forces with other state legislators to push for broader policing reforms, including statewide oversight boards and increased funding for community-based safety programs. Her efforts garnered national attention, solidifying her reputation as a champion for accountability and equity. In an interview with a major news network, Diana reflected on the journey. The fight for justice isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. There will be setbacks, but with every step forward, we get closer to the world we want to see, a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Back in Ravenwood, the community itself began to heal. New initiatives brought citizens and police officers together for open dialogue, fostering mutual understanding. Local schools introduced programs that educated students about civic rights and responsibilities, ensuring the next generation would be better equipped to hold power accountable. At a community event, Alex approached Diana with a hesitant smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "for believing in us, for fighting for us." Diana placed a hand on his shoulder. "This fight was always about all of us, Alex, and it doesn't end here. We keep pushing, together." The story came full circle on a quiet morning as Diana stood outside her office, gazing at the city skyline. The weight of the past months lingered, but so did the hope of what lay ahead. Samuel joined her, a cup of coffee in hand. "Busy day ahead?" he asked with a smile. "Always," Diana replied, a hint of humor in her voice. "But it's a good kind of busy." Samuel nodded. "You've already made a difference, you know." Diana looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "We've made a difference, but there's still so much more to do." As the sun rose higher, casting light over Ravenwood, the town stood at the precipice of a new era. The path to justice was long and fraught with challenges, but the events of the past months had proven that change was possible, with courage, unity, and relentless effort. As Diana Carter's fight for justice reshaped the town of Ravenwood, it became clear that real change is possible when individuals stand together against injustice. Her journey was not just about her own experience, but about empowering a community to demand accountability and fairness. The battle highlighted a universal truth. The power to create a better future lies in our hands, but it requires courage, persistence, and collective effort. What about you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced an abuse of power? How do you think communities can ensure justice for everyone? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that inspire change. Together, we can build a world where justice truly prevails.
It was a cold night in Atlanta, the wind slicing through the deserted streets as the sky, thick with clouds, seemed to press down on the city. Ethan Cole shoved his hands into the pockets of his worn leather jacket, trying to ignore the chill seeping through every layer of his clothing. He had just wrapped up another classified CIA mission, this one involving the surveillance of a suspected Russian spy embedded in a tech company. The operation had been successful, but as always, his work remained invisible. No applause, no public acknowledgement. To the world, Ethan Cole was an ordinary man. Only he knew the truth behind the facade. Ethan was 38, a proud black man with a dark complexion and eyes that carried the weight of battles fought and the determination to keep moving forward. Raised in East Point, Atlanta, he understood all too well the challenges of growing up black in America. Even so, he had always excelled, whether in sports or academics. Joining the CIA had been a quiet triumph, a step toward a dream he had never shared with anyone, using his position to make a difference, even from the shadows. As he cut through a residential neighborhood to avoid the busier main streets, Ethan noted the eerie silence of the area. Houses with darkened windows, white picket fences, perfectly trimmed lawns. It was a middle-class, predominantly white neighborhood, and he knew exactly how his presence might be perceived. Still, he pressed on, confident that his respectable demeanor and casual appearance were enough to keep trouble at bay. But trouble doesn't always need a reason to appear. Across the street, parked in a patrol car, sat Jake Lawson and Tom Mitchell. Lawson was tall, with nearly shaved blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that always seemed to be judging. At 42, he had nearly 2 decades of police experience under his belt, which he often bragged about. But that experience frequently translated into abuse of power and racially charged actions. He didn't need to say it out loud. His actions spoke volumes. Tom Mitchell, 35, was more reserved but no less dangerous. He followed Lawson like a shadow, rarely questioning his partner's orders. Mitchell was the type to justify his actions with, "I'm just doing my job." The 2 officers were bored that night. Atlanta was quiet, and they had spent most of their shift making small talk in the patrol car. Then they spotted Ethan. Well, look who's walking around here at this hour," Lawson said, pointing at Ethan with a lazy motion. He picked up his flashlight and smacked it against his palm, as if already gearing up for action. "Doesn't look like he belongs in this neighborhood," Mitchell replied, almost as if finishing Lawson's thought. "Let's check it out," Lawson said with a satisfied smirk. Ethan heard the sound of the police car approaching before he saw it. The low hum of the engine was unmistakable. He sighed, already anticipating what was coming. He tried to stay calm, slowing his pace as the vehicle drew nearer. When the red and blue lights lit up the street, he stopped and turned to face the officers. "Evening," Lawson said, stepping out of the car with one hand on his flashlight and the other resting on his holster. "What are you doing out here, buddy?" "Just heading home," Ethan replied evenly. His voice was steady but polite. "Heading home, huh?" Lawson tilted his head, scrutinizing Ethan like he was a puzzle to be solved. "Got any ID on you?" Ethan nodded slowly and began unzipping his backpack to retrieve his wallet, but Mitchell, who had just stepped out of the car, barked, "Hey, hands where we can see M." "I'm just grabbing my wallet," Ethan said, keeping his tone measured and his hands visible. "Show us your hands first," Lawson insisted, shining the flashlight directly in Ethan's face. The beam was harsh, invasive, an attempt to assert dominance before anything else could happen. Ethan complied, raising his hands and trying to suppress the irritation building inside him. He knew any sudden movement could escalate the situation. "Now, real slow. Get your wallet," Lawson instructed, his voice dripping with condescension. When Ethan handed over his ID, Lawson examined it with exaggerated slowness, as if searching for something incriminating. He looked Ethan up and down, narrowing his eyes. "East Point, huh? You're a little far from home, aren't you?" Lawson said accusingly. "I work in the city. Just passing through," Ethan replied, keeping his frustration in check. "What's in the backpack?" Mitchell asked, stepping closer. "Just personal stuff. Clothes, a tablet. Nothing important," Ethan said. But before he could offer to open it, Lawson had already gestured for Mitchell to search the bag. The next few minutes were nothing short of humiliating. Mitchell emptied Ethan's backpack right there on the sidewalk, scattering his belongings across the ground. Lawson stood by, a faint smirk on his face, while Ethan remained motionless, swallowing the anger rising within him. "Where'd you say you live again?" Lawson asked, not really waiting for an answer. "I told you, East Point," Ethan replied, his voice tight. "And you're here at this time of night, why?" Lawson took a step closer, invading Ethan's personal space. "I've already explained," Ethan said, taking a deep breath. He knew any further explanation would only fuel their desire to prolong this encounter. But it wasn't enough. Lawson glanced at Mitchell and gave a slight nod. "This doesn't feel right. I think we've got a situation here." "A situation? I haven't done anything wrong," Ethan protested, raising his voice for the first time. And that's when everything changed. Without warning, Mitchell grabbed Ethan's arm and spun him around, pinning him against the patrol car. Lawson moved in and, without hesitation, slapped a pair of handcuffs on him. "Resisting arrest now, huh?" Lawson said as he pushed Ethan harder against the car. "This is ridiculous. You know I didn't do anything," Ethan shouted, his voice echoing down the empty street. "Keep your mouth shut or it's going to get worse for you," Lawson shot back, while Mitchell tossed Ethan's backpack into the trunk of the patrol car. As he was shoved into the back of the cruiser, Ethan glanced out the window and saw his belongings still strewn across the sidewalk. The scene felt like a cruel metaphor for how he felt: exposed, vulnerable, and utterly dehumanized. At the station, things only went downhill. Lawson and Mitchell continued to treat Ethan with disdain, throwing sarcastic remarks his way while they fabricated a report. They accused him of resisting arrest and claimed he was carrying suspicious items in his bag. Ethan stayed silent. He knew arguing would accomplish nothing. Anything he said could be twisted against him. But inside, he was seething. His CIA training had prepared him for extreme situations, but nothing in the world had prepared him for the humiliation of being treated as less than human for something as mundane as walking through a neighborhood at night. When he was finally placed in a cold, dimly lit holding cell, he sat down on the bench and let out a deep sigh. He knew the real fight was just beginning. Ethan sat on the hard bench in the cold holding cell, his hands resting on his knees as he stared at the cracked concrete floor. The distant sound of muffled conversations and ringing phones from the front desk filled the air, but his mind was somewhere else. He replayed the events of the past hour in his head, searching for some way he could have avoided the situation. Maybe if he had chosen a different route, dressed differently, or spoken differently. But deep down, he knew none of it would have mattered. To officers like Jake Lawson and Tom Mitchell, his mere presence in that neighborhood was the only justification they needed. Across the station, Jake Lawson was leaning against the front desk, a smug grin on his face as he filled out Ethan's arrest report. "Got ourselves another one who thinks he's above the law," he said, nudging Mitchell, who stood next to him. Mitchell chuckled lightly, but his unease was evident. "You think he's going to fight this in court?" he asked, glancing back toward the holding cells. "Let him try," Lawson said, rolling his eyes. "No one's going to take his word over ours. We're the law in this town. Besides, who's going to care about some guy sneaking around a neighborhood where he doesn't belong?" Mitchell hesitated, then nodded. He had learned long ago not to question Lawson's authority, even when he had doubts. Meanwhile, in another part of Atlanta, Rebecca Mills sat at her desk in a dimly lit office. Rebecca was Ethan's direct supervisor at the CIA, a seasoned operative in her early 50s with sharp features and an even sharper mind. Her job was to keep her agents safe and ensure the agency's operations remained in the shadows. When she received a flag notification about Ethan's detainment, her heart sank. Rebecca knew Ethan was one of her best agents. Calm under pressure, fiercely intelligent, and deeply committed to his work. But she also knew that in his line of work, maintaining a low profile was critical. Any exposure, even something as mundane as an arrest, could unravel years of covert operations and compromise not only Ethan, but also the agency itself. She immediately picked up her phone and dialed Lauren Carter, a civil rights attorney she trusted implicitly. Lauren was in her late 30s, a powerhouse in the courtroom, known for her tenacity and unyielding dedication to justice. She had taken on high-profile cases before, but when Rebecca explained the situation, Lauren's tone grew serious. "They arrested a CIA agent?" Lauren asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Do they know who he is?" "They have no idea," Rebecca replied. "And for now, it has to stay that way. If Ethan's cover is blown, it'll create a ripple effect we can't afford. I need you to handle this quietly, at least until we can get him out." Lauren sighed. "Quietly might be tough if they've already filed charges, but I'll see what I can do. I'll head to the station first thing in the morning." "Thank you, Lauren," Rebecca said, her voice firm but grateful. Ethan's life might depend on this. Back at the station, Ethan was jolted from his thoughts when Lawson appeared outside his cell, holding a clipboard. "Wake up, buddy," Lawson said with mock cheerfulness. "You're going to be here for a while, so might as well get comfortable." Ethan didn't respond. He simply looked up at Lawson, his face expressionless, but his eyes burning with quiet defiance. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Lawson taunted, leaning against the bars. You know, you could have made this a lot easier on yourself. If you'd just been honest with us from the start. I was honest, Ethan interrupted, his voice calm but firm. You just didn't want to hear it. Lawson's smirk faded for a moment, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Careful, Cole. You don't want to make things worse for yourself. Ethan held his gaze. You already did that when you put those cuffs on me. Lawson stared at him for a few seconds, then shook his head and turned away. Suit yourself, he muttered, walking back toward the front desk. As the door swung shut behind him, Ethan leaned back against the wall of the cell. He knew antagonizing Lawson wouldn't help his situation, but he couldn't stomach the man's smug arrogance. Ethan had spent his entire life working twice as hard to prove his worth, only to end up here, treated like a criminal for simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, centering himself. This wasn't the first time he had been in a high-stakes situation, and it wouldn't be the last. He just had to trust that the right people, Rebecca, his attorney, would step in before things got out of control. Lauren arrived at the station early the next morning, her black heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor as she approached the front desk. Her tailored suit and confident stride immediately commanded attention. "I'm here to see Ethan Cole," she said, placing her briefcase on the counter. Lawson, who was sitting behind the desk, looked up with a smirk. "And you are?" "Lauren Carter." "I'm his attorney," she replied, her tone cool and professional. "I'd like to speak with my client now." Lawson leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Your client?" "Lady." He was caught acting suspicious in a neighborhood he didn't belong in. Pretty open and shut case. Lauren's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "Is that so? Well, we'll see what the court has to say about that. In the meantime, I suggest you let me speak to him." Lawson hesitated, clearly irritated by her confidence, but eventually waved Mitchell over to escort her to the holding cells. When Lauren saw Ethan, her expression softened slightly. "Ethan," she said, sitting on the bench outside his cell. "I'm Lauren Carter. Rebecca Mills sent me." Ethan looked up, relief flickering across his face. "Thank you for coming." Lauren nodded. "We don't have much time. Tell me everything. What happened, what they said, and what they're charging you with." Ethan recounted the events of the previous night, his voice steady but laced with frustration. Lauren listened intently, taking notes and asking occasional clarifying questions. By the time he finished, her expression had hardened. "This is a textbook case of racial profiling and abuse of power," she said, standing up. "I'll start filing motions to get you released immediately. And don't say a word to anyone else without me present." Ethan nodded. Understood. As Lauren left the station, her mind was already racing with strategies. She knew this wasn't just about Ethan. This was about holding the system accountable, a system that had humiliated and dehumanized him for no reason other than the color of his skin. And she wasn't going to let them get away with it. The tension in the station began to shift as word spread that Ethan's attorney was Lauren Carter. Officers whispered among themselves, and even Mitchell started to look uneasy. But Lawson remained confident, dismissing her as just another loudmouth lawyer. He didn't realize yet that he had just made a mistake far bigger than he could comprehend. Lauren Carter's heels echoed through the courthouse hallway as she made her way to the pretrial hearing. Her stride was purposeful, her expression sharp, and her confidence unshakable. She had spent the past 2 days building Ethan's defense, reviewing the fabricated arrest report, surveillance footage from nearby homes, and even combing through Jake Lawson and Tom Mitchell's records. What she found didn't surprise her. A pattern of racially biased stops, thinly veiled under the guise of suspicious behavior. This wasn't the first time Lawson and Mitchell had targeted someone like Ethan. It was just the first time they might not get away with it. Ethan, dressed in a simple suit Rebecca had arranged to be delivered to him, sat quietly at the defense table. He felt the weight of the room pressing down on him, the whispers of spectators and the glares of the 2 officers sitting with the prosecution. His training had taught him to stay composed in tense situations, but this was different. This wasn't a covert operation. This was his life being scrutinized under a public microscope. As the judge entered and called the court to order, Lauren leaned toward Ethan. "Remember, don't react to anything they say. Let me do the talking." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. The prosecutor, David Shepard, was a middle-aged man with slick back hair and an air of self-importance. He opened with a brief, calculated statement. "Your Honor, the defendant was apprehended late at night in a residential neighborhood where he did not reside. Officers Lawson and Mitchell acted appropriately in stopping Mr. Cole, who was behaving suspiciously and later resisted arrest. This is a straightforward case of law enforcement doing their duty." Lauren felt her stomach churn at the audacity of his words, but she maintained her composure. She stood, buttoning her blazer as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, what we have here is not law enforcement doing their duty. What we have is a blatant case of racial profiling and abuse of power." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Mr. Cole was walking home. That is his only crime. The officer's actions were not only unjustified, but deliberately escalated to humiliate and dehumanize my client. She walked toward the bench, her voice steady but firm. "I will present evidence, including video footage and audio recordings, that contradict the officer's version of events. Additionally, I have documented complaints against Officer Lawson for similar incidents, indicating a clear pattern of misconduct." She turned and faced the prosecutor. "This is not about law enforcement. This is about accountability." The first piece of evidence Lauren introduced was footage from a Ring doorbell camera across the street from where Ethan had been stopped. The video showed Ethan walking calmly, hands visible, before being aggressively approached by Lawson and Mitchell. The audio captured their condescending tone and baseless accusations, as well as Ethan's repeated attempts to comply. The courtroom was silent as the video played. Even Shepard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ethan watched, his heart pounding as the scene replayed. It was one thing to experience it. It was another to see it from a third-person perspective. When the video ended, Lauren turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this footage clearly shows that Mr. Cole was not behaving suspiciously, nor did he resist arrest. The officer's narrative is entirely fabricated." Lawson's face hardened and he glanced at Mitchell, who avoided his gaze. Shepard stood, attempting to downplay the video. While the footage may raise questions, it does not negate the officer's judgment in the moment. Law enforcement often has to make split-second decisions to protect the community. Lauren cut him off. "Split-second decisions? Your Honor, these officers had no reason to approach Mr. Cole in the first place. Their actions weren't about protecting the community. They were about targeting a black man in a predominantly white neighborhood." The judge, a stern-looking woman with graying hair, raised her hand to silence them. "I've seen enough for now. We'll resume after lunch." During the break, Ethan sat with Lauren in a small conference room. His hands rested on the table, his fingers drumming lightly against the surface. "They don't care about the truth," he said finally, his voice low. "They care about protecting themselves," Lauren agreed. "But that's why we're going to keep pushing. This isn't over." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Do you really think they'll be held accountable? Guys like Lawson, they always find a way out." Lauren leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Not this time. Not if I can help it." Rebecca entered the room, her presence commanding even in silence. She sat down across from Ethan, placing a hand on his. "We've got your back," she said softly. "You're not alone in this." Ethan nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. The afternoon session brought more damning evidence against Lawson and Mitchell. Lauren called witnesses, including a local resident who testified that Lawson had stopped him multiple times for no reason. Another witness described Mitchell as silent but complicit, always backing up Lawson's questionable actions. When it was time for the officers to testify, Lawson's arrogance was palpable. He stuck to his story, insisting that Ethan had been acting suspiciously and claiming that he had feared for his safety. Lauren approached him, her tone sharp. "Officer Lawson, are you saying that a man walking with his hands visible and responding calmly to your questions made you feel unsafe?" Lawson hesitated but doubled down. "It's about instincts. When you've been in this job as long as I have, you develop a sense for when something's off." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "A sense? Or a bias?" "Objection," Shepard interjected. "Withdrawn," Lauren said smoothly, turning back to Lawson. "One last question, Officer Lawson. Are you aware of the complaints filed against you for similar incidents of profiling?" Lawson's jaw tightened. Those complaints were unfounded. Lauren smiled faintly. "Interesting, because several of those complainants are here today, ready to testify." The room shifted as whispers spread among the spectators. By the end of the day, the cracks in the prosecution's case were impossible to ignore. Even Shepard seemed rattled, his arguments growing weaker as Lauren dismantled every point he tried to make. Outside the courthouse, a small group of protesters had gathered, holding signs that read "Justice for Ethan" and "End Racial Profiling." The case was gaining attention, and the media was beginning to swarm. Ethan stepped outside with Lauren and Rebecca, the cool evening air hitting his face. He paused, looking at the crowd and the cameras. "This isn't just about me," he said quietly. Lauren nodded. "No, it's not. But your fight could make a difference." Rebecca placed a hand on his shoulder. "One step at a time, Ethan. We'll get there." As the crowd chanted his name, Ethan realized the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just a battle for his freedom. It was a battle for something bigger. The courthouse was tense as the trial entered its final stretch. The media presence had doubled overnight, with reporters camped outside and camera crews setting up for live coverage. Signs demanding justice for Ethan had multiplied, carried by a growing number of protesters. For Ethan, the weight of the case was now heavier than ever. What had started as a humiliating personal ordeal had become a symbol of a larger fight. A fight he hadn't asked for but couldn't turn away from. Inside the courtroom, Lauren Carter sat at the defense table, reviewing her notes with laser focus. The past few days had chipped away at the prosecution's case, but Lauren knew the real challenge lay in forcing the jury to see beyond the officers' uniforms. Jake Lawson and Tom Mitchell had spent their careers benefiting from the implicit trust granted to law enforcement. Breaking through that veneer of credibility was no small task, but Lauren was relentless. Ethan sat beside her, silent but composed. His face betrayed none of the anxiety swirling inside him. Rebecca Mills, seated a few rows behind, watched him closely. She knew the toll this was taking, not just on Ethan but on everyone involved. The CIA had kept its distance publicly, but Rebecca was orchestrating things behind the scenes, ensuring that Ethan's career and his life wouldn't be derailed by this ordeal. The day's proceedings began with the prosecution calling its final witnesses, a character witness for the officers and a supposed expert on police protocol. The witness, a retired police captain, testified about the split-second decisions officers must make in the field. Officer Lawson and Officer Mitchell acted within the scope of their training. The captain said confidently, their actions were reasonable given the circumstances. Lauren stood to cross-examine, her expression unreadable. "Captain Morris," she began, pacing slowly, "you mentioned the term reasonable. Can you define what reasonable looks like when an officer stops someone walking down the street, hands visible, answering questions calmly?" Morris hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "Well, it depends on the situation." "Exactly," Lauren interrupted, her tone sharp. "And in this situation, there was no indication of a crime, no report of a suspect, and no weapons or contraband found. So I'll ask again, what was reasonable about their actions?" Morris stammered, "Officers have to trust their instincts." Lauren's voice rose slightly, her frustration clear. "Instincts or biases, Captain? Because as far as I can see, the only thing these officers acted on was the color of Mr. Cole's skin." The courtroom murmured, and the judge banged her gavel. Order. Lauren returned to her seat, leaving Captain Morris visibly shaken. As the defense prepared to call its final witnesses, Lauren pulled Ethan aside during a brief recess. "We need you to testify," she said bluntly. Ethan tensed. "Lauren, I don't know if that's a good idea. You've seen how they twist things. One wrong word and—" "I know the risks," Lauren interrupted, "but you're the only one who can make them understand. They need to hear what this did to you, Ethan, not just as a black man, but as a human being. If we want the jury to see you, really see you, this is the only way." Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. He thought of everything he'd been trained to do: blend in, stay unnoticed, avoid becoming a target. And yet, here he was in the spotlight for reasons beyond his control. Finally, he nodded. "I'll do it." When Ethan took the stand, the courtroom was silent. All eyes were on him as he adjusted the microphone, his hands steady despite the tension in the room. Lauren stood beside him, her presence a quiet reassurance. "Mr. Cole," Lauren began, "can you tell the court in your own words what happened the night of your arrest?" Ethan described the encounter in meticulous detail. The sound of the patrol car's engine, the flashlight in his face, the accusations, the roughness of the handcuffs. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that filled the room. "And how did that make you feel?" Lauren asked. Ethan paused, taking a deep breath. "It made me feel small," he said finally. "Like nothing I'd accomplished mattered. I've spent my entire life working to be better, to prove myself. And in that moment, none of it meant anything. I was just another black man they didn't trust." The jury was transfixed, some leaning forward in their seats. Even the judge appeared moved. Lauren stepped closer. "What do you want the jury to understand about what happened to you?" Ethan looked directly at the jurors, his voice steady but emotional. "That this isn't just about me. It's about what people like me go through every day. It's about a system that allows officers like them to treat us like we don't belong. And it needs to change." The courtroom was silent as Lauren sat down. Ethan's words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. In her closing argument, Lauren tied everything together. She reminded the jury of the video evidence, the fabricated reports, the testimony from witnesses who had experienced similar treatment. "This case is about accountability," she said, her voice unwavering. "It's about ensuring that the people we trust to protect us don't abuse that trust. Mr. Cole deserves justice, not just for what happened to him, but for everyone who has been made to feel invisible, unworthy, or less than human. This is your opportunity to send a message that no one is above the law." David Shepard's closing argument, by contrast, was defensive and scattered. He attempted to paint the officers as victims of public scrutiny, but the weight of the evidence against them was too much to overcome. As the jury deliberated, Ethan sat in a waiting room with Lauren and Rebecca. The hours dragged on, each minute heavier than the last. Ethan stared at the clock, his mind racing with what-ifs. Finally, the door opened and a bailiff stepped in. "The jury has reached a verdict." Ethan stood, his legs feeling like lead as he followed Lauren and Rebecca back into the courtroom. The judge called the court to order, and the foreperson stood. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. In the case of State of Georgia versus Ethan Cole, on the charge of resisting arrest, we find the defendant not guilty. A wave of relief washed over Ethan, but the foreperson wasn't done. In the case of State of Georgia versus Jake Lawson and Tom Mitchell, on the charges of falsifying reports and excessive force, we find the defendants guilty. The room erupted in murmurs. Lawson's face turned red with anger, while Mitchell slumped in his seat, visibly defeated. Ethan closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Justice had been served, but the journey wasn't over yet. Outside, the protesters cheered as news of the verdict spread. Cameras flashed as Lauren addressed the crowd. But Ethan stayed back, watching from a distance. Rebecca approached him, her expression soft. "You did it." Ethan shook his head. "We did it. But this isn't the end." Rebecca nodded. "No, it's not. But it's a start." As Ethan stepped into the crowd, the chants of his name echoing around him, he realized that his fight had only just begun. The morning after the verdict, Ethan stood in his apartment, staring out the window at the Atlanta skyline. The city buzzed with life below, but for the first time in days, the noise felt distant. The weight he had carried since the night of his arrest had begun to lift, but the scars, both emotional and mental, remained. His phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, and he glanced at the screen. It was Rebecca. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "I'm still processing," Ethan admitted. "It doesn't feel real yet. I keep replaying it all in my head, like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." Rebecca paused. "That's normal. What you went through, what they put you through, isn't something you'll just forget. But you're stronger than this. You proved that." Ethan sighed. "Yeah, but it's not just about me, is it? That courtroom wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about something bigger. And now I feel like I owe it to everyone who's been in my shoes to do something." Rebecca smiled faintly. "And what does that look like?" "I don't know yet," Ethan said, running a hand over his head. "But I'm going to figure it out." Later that day, Lauren met Ethan at a local cafe. The media frenzy had quieted slightly, but there were still murmurs and glances as they sat down. "You made headlines," Lauren said, sliding a newspaper across the table. The front page read, "Verdict sparks debate on police accountability in Atlanta." Below it was a photo of Ethan leaving the courthouse, his face stoic yet resolute. Ethan scanned the article briefly before folding the paper and setting it aside. "I didn't ask for the spotlight," he said. "No one asked for it," Lauren replied. "But it found you anyway. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Ethan met her gaze. "I've been thinking about that. I want to use this experience to help others, to make sure this doesn't keep happening." Lauren nodded. "There's power in your story, Ethan. You have a platform now, whether you like it or not. People are listening." "I don't just want to talk," Ethan said firmly. "I want to act. I've been working in the shadows for years, but maybe it's time to step into the light." Lauren smiled. "I think you're ready for that." Over the following weeks, Ethan began taking steps toward turning his ordeal into a catalyst for change. He met with community leaders, activists, and legal experts, learning about the systemic issues that enabled officers like Lawson and Mitchell to thrive. He attended town halls, spoke at schools, and started mentoring young black men who looked up to him. The CIA, under Rebecca's guidance, quietly supported his efforts. While Ethan remained an active agent, his public advocacy work became an extension of his mission to protect and serve. Rebecca, ever watchful, ensured that Ethan's dual roles remained balanced. "You've always been good at walking the line," she told him during one of their meetings. "This is just another version of that." Ethan nodded. "Except this time, I'm not hiding who I am." Months later, the city of Atlanta saw a tangible shift. Ethan's case had sparked an internal review of police practices, leading to the dismissal of several officers with histories of misconduct. The local government began implementing mandatory bias training for law enforcement, and the community as a whole started demanding greater accountability. Ethan was invited to speak at a community event commemorating the anniversary of his trial. Standing on a stage in front of a crowd of hundreds, he felt a wave of emotion. Signs reading "Justice for All" and "End Racial Profiling" waved in the air, and the energy was palpable. "Good evening," Ethan began, his voice steady. "When I stood in that courtroom months ago, I wasn't just fighting for my freedom. I was fighting for the right to be seen, to be treated as a human being. And while we won that fight, the battle isn't over." He paused, scanning the crowd. "This isn't about one case or one person. It's about a system that needs to change, a system that has ignored too many voices for too long. But tonight, standing here with all of you, I know we have the power to make that change." Together, the crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing into the night. Back at home, Ethan sat on his couch, scrolling through messages of support and gratitude on social media. Among them was a text from Lauren. "You killed it tonight. Proud of you. He smiled, setting the phone down. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. Not because the fight was over, but because he knew he was on the right path. Ethan Cole had spent his life as an invisible man, working behind the scenes to protect his country. But now, for the first time, he was stepping into the light, not just as an agent, but as an advocate, a voice for change, and a symbol of resilience. And he was just getting started.